Hi class, how is everyone doing this evening? Welcome to week 4. Excellent. Well, I hope everyone had a great weekend. Did something fun, did some relaxing things, and had an opportunity to work on the materials for the course. And hopefully, you guys got Project 5 in on time, and I'm sure that you guys have. And I hope that it wasn't too challenging for you guys, but I hope that it was a good exercise that you guys could get an opportunity to do some more training with time-based processors. This week, we are going to conclude the class with our final training as we discuss mixing. The concept of mixing, we're going to apply that to a song, or you guys will apply the concepts that you will learn this week to a song that we provide you to mix for your final project for the course. The song will have 20 tracks, not too many tracks, but it's going to be certainly more than what you have in your current sessions of what you've been doing here in DRP. But what's interesting about the materials that what you're going to do this week and how to apply that in the mix, you're going to be including all of the concepts that you have learned this month. So gain structure, time-based and dynamic-based processing, as well as tonight we're going to go a little deeper involved in session organization. That was one of the things that I had mentioned to you guys throughout the month of looking at a Pro Tools session, and I was saying at the very end, you guys should be very familiar, or by the time that you're finished this class, you should be able to look at a session that's pretty well detailed with color coding and groups and markers and all of the things that's going to arrange and organize your session to have a better workflow. And I hope that you guys, after DRP, will be able to continue to adapt these habits workflow in your own sessions as you continue throughout Full Sail as well as in your careers. So I'm very excited to get into the training session tonight. Again, we're going to go over session organization, mixing the song, and then lastly, how to deliver your mix to the client, which will be us. Um, this will be your final project, Project 6. Again, everything is going to be inside of Pro Tools. We're going to provide the song for you, so there's nothing that you have to do yourself besides just work on your mix. And the good thing about this project this week is that you have an entire week to work on the mix. As we get into the concepts of mixing and you see what's actually involved in mixing, you will see that it's not an assignment that you will probably want to approach just doing one day. Mixing is a process of a lot of different steps. It's an art to it that will require a lot of listening. And when you're working on your mix, it's it's pretty good to step away from it to come back to it later to get a fresh perspective on it. So that's what we are going to be doing this week. I'm very excited about that. Let's talk about mixing. Um, Mixing is balancing all the elements of a song. When we think of the elements of the song, you're thinking about all of the tracks. When you listen to any of your favorite songs out there, you will hear an assortment of sounds: drums, bass, guitar, keyboards, vocals. Um, it will be your job in mixing as the mix engineer to balance all of these elements. You balance these initially with doing fader movements, adjusting the fader so that sounds that needs to be more prominent in your mix will be louder than those that are considered to be more background sounds. So you're going to be using faders to balance the elements of the song. You will find as you're mixing your song that by simply adjusting the faders to achieve a good balance may not be the only, or you may have to do something else to get a proper balance. And this is where we got into adjusting frequencies by way of using an equalizer. So another job of mixing is managing the frequency content of that selection of that song that you're mixing. Simply by adjusting faders will not give you the results that you need, simply because there are going to be some sounds that's going to mask one another in your mix. So when we talk about masking sounds, we're talking about how the sounds are sitting on top of one another. And there are going to be elements within your mix that are designed to be more out front, such as the vocal. You will want like your drums to be really, really punchy if you're mixing like a dance song or you're mixing an R&B or pop song. That rhythm is going to be very important. as well as the vocal and some of the other contents, and we'll look at those in details. So balancing the elements of a song, managing the frequency content. Also, creating a great image, great stereo image and depth. When you're creating great image, we use panning, and panning is going to move sounds from between your left and right speaker. Now, all of you guys will be mixing in stereo, so you have that space that you're mixing in between your left and right speaker. If you don't have speakers, that will be the space of mixing between your left and right ear on your headphones. And then also creating depth in your mix. We create depth in the mix by using a variety of time-based processors. Remember, time-based processors such as reverbs and delays create depth in our mix and color. So while you are balancing your sounds and making those sounds louder or softer in your mix, using dynamic processors to control those inconsistencies, in addition to that, using EQ to also bring things further out in your mix, creating great depth, adjusting your pan, moving between your left and right speaker, as well as creating a depth in the mix which is going to bring the listener closer or either farther away from that particular sound or sounds within your mix. So it's quite a bit of imaging that you're doing with mixing, and it can be quite challenging. Mixing is an art form that is something that you're not going to get overnight. It takes most engineers many years of practice. And how do you practice this? You practice by keep working on different jobs, working on different mixes to get better. Next, making the record sound larger than life. No one wants to have a mix that sounds pretty small and it's not going to compete with something that's in a like genre of music. So if you're mixing a hip-hop song, you want that record to sound larger than life. If you're mixing a rock song, you probably want that wall of sound of guitars. You want the drums and the guitars and the vocals to really be present in the mix. You want the mix to sound really large. And then lastly, which is probably one of the most important parts and aesthetics of mixing, is to convey the feeling or evoke an emotion from the listener. Now, as a song is in the beginning stages of creation, that starts with the songwriter, right? Either someone sitting on the piano or writing on a lyric sheet or strumming a guitar, creating melodies and lyrics to create this song. Then we move a little bit further, and what's interesting about how we produce music today and the role of a producer, wears many hats. One that could not only be the songwriter, could be the one who arranges the music, one who hires the musicians to come into the studio to play the music, as well as someone that will be the recording engineer as well as the mix engineer. So as a producer in today's time, that will incorporate many different roles. But the important part of when you're mixing a song is when you're trying to evoke an emotion from the listener. Think about the song in its original stage. For you guys who've written songs in the past, and if you haven't taken your production, like their song that you've written that's from like a demo stage to like a fully produced demo to a produced record and it's being mixed and mastered, it goes through many different personnel and many different stages. And what's important is that how you mix the song, that is like the next to last presentation of that work. Meaning if you have a bad or poor mix, and what will be defined as a poor mix is probably one that's not, using these prior steps here, like balancing the elements of the song. Maybe there are sounds that's sticking out. However, whatever the case is, if you're not evoking that emotion from the listener and you're not capturing them from that initial song, then you're really missing the mark there. So as a mix engineer, that person's job is very crucial because that is the last step of presentation before you present it to your audience, how this is going to sound once you have it bounced down to an MP3 or you put it on a CD or whether it's playing on a radio. Making sure that emotion is still being evoked from the listener. When approaching a mix, there's many things to consider. Consider the content of what you're mixing. If you're mixing a country song, and you're not used to mixing country or even listening to that style of music, it would be very wise to go on iTunes or Spotify and listen to some light music. And typically, if you're getting hired to do a mix, it's probably because you have some work in your portfolio of something that's mixed the way they would like that song to be delivered or mixed. So study the content, know the genre of music, consider the tools that you have to create the mix. In this class for the project, you will be doing everything in the box. So in addition to doing things inside the box, meaning you're going to be using all of the plugins that you have that came with Pro Tools, you're going to be using Pro Tools itself. And if you have a pair of monitors, you can certainly use that for reference. Otherwise, you will be using your headphones. Um, when you're in a larger studio that consists of outboard gear and other devices, maybe the song is not on in Pro Tools as far as the recorder. Maybe it's on an analog tape machine. Maybe it's on a digital tape machine or a digital hard disk recorder. And so you have other pieces of gear and components in your studio to consider when mixing how you're going to deliver this, whether you're going to be using a console like what we see here behind me on the screen on my wallpaper, whether you're going to be using a console or whether you're going to be mixing in a box. Whatever the case is, you want to stick with those first 5 rules of balancing and creating great image and depth in your mix. You want to use those steps and properly deliver your mix. Um, One thing to consider when, as I mentioned earlier, about listening to your mix. It's not uncommon when you're mixing the song that you will probably be working on that song for a minimum of 4 to 8 hours. That time will fly by. That's very easy to spend that time getting your mix going, raising your faders and adjusting those sounds and balancing them and adjusting the sounds in the stereo image in the stereo field to create good imaging. So it's not uncommon to spend about that much time um, to get started and initially with your mix. So when approaching Project 6, I want you guys to take breaks. Like maybe you would start your mix this evening. Maybe after the training, you see what I would typically do as far as session organization to get everything going. You can pull up all of your stems, import them into your session, organize everything so everything is ready to go. Make sure all your labeling, your color coding is correct. And some of these things are required for the project, and some of them are just good habits of organization as you're working inside of your DAW. But whatever the case is, when you are approaching your mix, give yourself some time. Give yourself a few days to go back and compare your mix. Listen to a lot of reference material. Again, if you're mixing a song that you're not used to working in that style of music, you will certainly want to hear something that is conducive to what you're mixing. Otherwise, you will completely miss the mark. So as you're mixing this song, step away from the mix. Maybe spend 4 hours on it one day or a couple of hours on it. Step away from it, come back the next day and see with a fresh set of ears how your mix is going. If you find that things are not exactly going the way as planned, you can always start back or from the beginning, or you can make some modifications to your mix. What I like to do is, if I'm not fully sure about my listening environment, like I don't do a lot of mixing in my home. As you see, my room is not treated, so I don't have it set up where I truly trust what's being translated through my speakers. Meaning that as I am adjusting my levels and as I'm adjusting the panning and doing dynamic and time-based processing, what I am doing to the mix, I'm not exactly sure how it's translated outside of the room that I'm in. So it is not uncommon to either burn a CD or just email the song to yourself or put it in your playlist. You can Bluetooth it in your car, use an auxiliary jack, or again burn a CD. Listen to it in a different environment. I know for me, I spend most of my time in my car in transit. So a lot of the music what I would trust, the most as far as a sound system would be my car stereo system. And it's not the best, but it's where I spend a lot of time listening to music. So in that environment, I can probably hear if the bass is too loud, if the snare is not loud enough, if the vocal is too muddy. if I'm not getting clarity in my mix. Taking your mix, giving yourself time, and we give you a full week to work on your project 6. Given that amount of time, you're able to um, take the content and listen to it in a different environment to check to make sure that you're on the right in the right place as far as your mix. As you're building your mix, where to start? One of the best places to start when building your mix is listen to the arrangement. Listen to what the song is saying. Um, when you open up Pro Tools, any session, all of the faders, um, or anytime you create or import tracks into your Pro Tools session, all of the faders will be at 0. If you get a session from someone, like, if I was to deliver a session to you, I always have like a rough mix already going. So it has a basic volume setting, basic panning, just so you can get the idea of where I want these elements to sit in my mix. So listen to the arrangement. Let the arrangement speak to you and kind of dictate where your mix should go. If you're trying to go against the arrangement that's there, as far as like the mix levels, then you can certainly come out with a different response. And I believe I kind of went over that a little bit in our review session last week or a couple of weeks ago, with like having different elements. Like you see here, I have a kick, snare, and clap. In this exercise here, or at least a screenshot, it is probably better that the snare level is louder than the clap level. So study those things when you are listening to the music, where to begin building your mix. I typically start building my mix with drums. I always begin with the drums. That's the rhythm. I usually like to get that going, get the bass going with the drums, because I like to have a good marriage between the bass and the kick drum, because that's where a lot of I want that to be really, really tight. I'm going to use a lot of compression, not to over compress those two instruments specifically, but just to get those two to sit well together, the kick and the bass. So I tend to start with my drums most of the time. If you're starting with more folky style music or country, you could implement or bring in the vocals sooner. That's not uncommon. Maybe pull up the basic rhythm section, the drums, bass, guitar, and then automatically or quickly bring the vocal into your session. One of the common mistakes that people make when they are mixing is to spend quite a bit of time on the music, because that is the music bed, and that's pretty much the body of the entire song. But one of the common mistakes is to spend a lot of time on the music and not give a sufficient amount of time for the lead vocal. So make sure when you are mixing for Project 6, you're going to have 20 tracks. Of those 20 tracks, 3 of those tracks will be, actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those tracks will be vocal tracks. 1 will be the lead vocal. You will have 2 background vocal tracks and 3 odd tracks. So as you are working on your Project 6, just make sure that you pull up the vocal pretty quick in the mix to see where it's sitting. So if you're doing some kind of effect or effects on your instruments, see if that works with the lead vocal, because that is what's carrying the melody of the song. Creating contrast in your mix. You're going to have elements of your mix that's going to be big. Some are going to be small. For Project 6, you're going to have an assortment of different synth parts. The song that you're going to be mixing is a kind of a dance EDM kind of pop record. So 4 on the floor, you're going to have clap, snare, bass, 4 synth tracks, and some synth pads. So in those pads, it's going to probably be where you spend some time just really shaping and creating some depth in your mix with the body and the meat of your mix, being that that's going to be like the bed. So creating contrast, you will listen to some sounds and you will hear that those sounds are pretty large. They're going to be really jumping out at you. Then you're going to have other elements that's going to be smaller. How do you create a good balance between those two? How do you create a good balance between elements of your mix that are dark versus elements of your mix that are bright? If you're mixing everything bright in your mix, then you're not going to have any substance in your mids and your low mids, so it's not going to sound pretty. It's not going to sound rich. Having your mix too bright can make your mix sound thin. If your mix is full of all of these dark elements and a lot of mids and things like that, and low mids, you risk running into the problem of having a muddy mix and it's not clear. So you want to balance these things as you're listening to the arrangement, listening to the sounds, listening to what's given. It's really important to know that it's not your job to recreate or reinvent the wheel, more so than to just polish off what's there, you know, especially if you have a rough mix. If you have a rough mix that's telling you that, hey, this is the kind of relation of where I want these sounds to sit, then it would be your job to just kind of balance those things, balance the frequencies, so you have separation in your mix, not only with just levels, but with clarity, so you can hear all of the elements in your mix. Looking at the stereo field, it's important to know that it is a finite space. What you see here are your pan knobs. And with your pan knobs, this is how you're going to move elements of your mix away from center. By moving them away from the center and you're giving them a dedicated place in the stereo field, that's going to also help with the separation. Because it's going to be, when you listen to the mix and you perceive it, you're going to be able to hear exactly where that sound is sitting in the mix. So I have quite a variety here. For the project, we want you to create a wide mix. So what does it mean to create a wide mix? Creating a wide mix is going to make good use of your panning, make good logical use of panning, and making sure the elements that are intended to be wider in the mix, make sure that you spread those out so you can get those away from the center. Here you see I have a few pan to the left, I have some pan to the right, but I have different variety in here. Like as you see, this is pan 80 to the left, 80 to the right. Over here, I brought it in some more. So now it's 61 to the left, 60 to the right. So now I'm covering a different space in my stereo field. Now, when I say a good logical approach to panning your instruments, not every mix engineer will pan, you know, it's not like a right or wrong way to pan these elements, but there's kind of more of a logical sense or approach to panning. For example, there are some elements in your mix that you will not pan, such as the kick drum, the snare, the bass, and the vocal. And you wouldn't pan these instruments traditionally and typically because these elements need to feed both speakers, the left and the right speaker. If you have your lead vocal pan to the left, then a person's listening to your mix in headphones or in the car, it's going to sound pretty lopsided, right? Because it's not sitting right in the center. Think about it if you were at a live concert and you're imagining all of the players on the stage and you're in a, you know, in a nice theater, and you're listening to the sound and you hear only the vocal in the right speaker. So those who are sitting on the left side of the venue are not going to be able to hear the lead vocal because it's not positioned in a logical space or logical, you know, position there. So again, the kick drum, the bass, the snare, and the lead vocal in your mix will be at center pan. Okay, so you're not going to pan those. When mixing like live drums, as I showed you the picture earlier, live drums earlier in the month, live drums consist of many different elements. You have kick, snare, hi-hats, toms, overheads. You're going to mix these. You could either mix those and pan those in drummer's perspective, meaning that how your pan knobs are will be exactly where those instruments are if you were sitting down at the drum set. If you're going to either pan it in, you could either pan it in drummer's perspective, or you could either pan it in audience perspective. So basically, audience perspective will be completely opposite than the drummer's perspective. So just shift everything to the opposite side. So panning is a very vital part of the mix. Some students get through the mix and they forget to pan, and you will certainly be marked off points for that. So make sure that you spend some time to pan these elements out. All right. I can upload these slides for you guys if you want this week's training keynote. So I can upload this for you guys. Okay, so let's continue on with building your mix. You could consider the 3 to 4 rule. And the 3 to 4 rule dictates that no more than 3 to 4 of these elements will be playing simultaneously. And these elements will either be your rhythm, pads, melody, counterpoint, or incidental spice. Anything that's rhythm, that obviously will be your drums, rhythm guitar, any percussion elements, anything that's creating a basics of like a downbeat, upbeat, any syncopation that's going to be happen will be a part of your rhythm section. You have your pads, which are going to be your chordal instruments like pianos, strings, those elements that are going to be more sustaining in your mix. A lot of the pads are what's going to be carrying the harmonic content of your mix. So those will pretty much be drawn out. So that will fall in the category of pads. You can think of these as elements that are like in whole notes or longer, like half notes and whole notes, longer passages. It could also be background vocals, doing like oohs or ahs. And then you have your melody, which is the most important part if you are creating something with vocal or anything, any song, because most songs, all songs have a melody of some sort, right? Whether that is a vocalist or instrumental melody. And it's always good to know that not only the melody could fall with just the vocal, it could be a counterpoint element of your mix, of your song. So let's say we have like a call and response where the vocal is singing a phrase and then the saxophone comes after that and playing a melody. That wouldn't be considered a melody. In this sense, it will be considered a counterpoint because it's in a contrast to the main melody. So it's kind of working against the melody in this case. And then lastly, you have incidental spice. Incidental spice would be any of those articulated kind of extra elements of your mix, such as like bells or effects, any sweeps or anything of that. It could be ad-libs or horn stabs. That's going to be in addition to the rest of the other elements there that you have. So when considering the 3 to 4 rule, by using no more than 3 to 4 of these at a time, this is going to help you so your mix doesn't sound cluttered. If you are mixing a song, most likely in the arrangement, these aspects are already implemented, meaning that you're not going to have, you have your rhythm, your pad, and melody. Then you might have a counterpoint or you might have an incidental spice sound that's happening with that. But all of these will not be playing back at the same time. If all of these will play back at the same time, then your mix could be very cluttered, or the arrangement will be very cluttered. So what I like to do, even when I'm programming or creating songs or arrangements, I like to consider this, like try to stop myself if I feel like I'm going overboard with creating too many things that's going to make the listener a bit confused of where should I be putting my attention towards. Should I be listening to the vocals? Should I be listening to that synth line? Should I be listening to the guitar? Is that a guitar solo, or is that just some articulated notes that's going to enhance? Is it operating as a counterpoint? So all of these things is what your listener is perceiving and just kind of summing up in their head as they're listening to the mix. And it is your job to put all of these elements in the proper place where it's not cluttered, where you have a good balance of these elements, a good balance of frequencies and depth in your mix. So your mix is intelligible, so you can understand what's happening with the song as the song is developing. So just remember, less is more when considering the arrangement and mixing of your song. Next, when building your mix, you may find that doing levels and doing panning and using some dynamic based processors such as compressors and gates to control inconsistencies in your sounds, you may find that you still need an extra push just to balance some things off or just create some interesting effects. Like in a previous class, someone had asked, If I wanted to apply delay on just one word, or I wanted to add reverb at the end of the phrase that's just kind of really, really big. And we do these things with automation. And automation is no more than fader movements, panning movements, etc. Automation could also include automating plugins. So you could bypass a plugin, you could change the decay time on a reverb plugin, from going from small to a longer, or short to a longer decay time. Many things that you can do in your DAW with automation. Prior to automation, what engineers would do, they would sit down at the console, the main engineer and the assistant, or the intern will sit down at the console, and they will grab several faders, and they will study and take notes of the mix and say, okay, at this word here, or at this line, the lead vocal could come up a little more. It seems a little bit buried under that bass riff, or under the piano chord right there. So, or maybe during the solo, we're going to push the guitar part out, and we're going to create a fade at the very end. So they'll take notes, and they would sit at the console, and then they would just maybe do a practice run, and then they would just record the mix down to their device. Whereas we record our mix internally on our laptops, whether we're bouncing it down or we're routing it back in to re-record it on some more tracks. In this case, they would sit down and record their mix to either half-inch tape or quarter-inch tape, or DAT tape, which is digital audio tape. So whatever the recording device would be for recording their master or their final mix, they will practice their movements, and then they will record these things down. Now, it gives the whole feel and aesthetics to make the mix breathe, right? By moving the faders, and as you're getting throughout the song for the chorus, you can maybe move the background vocals up and make them sound more organic, more lively, right? So everything is not pretty static. However, they didn't have the function of undo at that time. So automation came along, where now as you're working on your mix and you find that with the compressor inserted on my track, it's still that vocal is still not tamed enough. But if I compress it more, I am creating too much gain reduction, and it doesn't sound natural. So you will implement automation, and as you would do that, you will be able to adjust and ride the fader as you are going down. And that, again, that could be for fader movements, panning, plug-in movements, etc. You could even create mutes. Like, it's not uncommon to, like at the beginning of a song, to just mute all the faders and then unmute them as they're coming in, or you could trim up the clip. Either way. So we have these different modes in automation. Well, the first one we have off, which is going to disable all the automation. You won't be able to write or play back any of the automation. Then we have read, which is the default. Once you open up your DAW, it would generally be in read, which is going to play back any automation data that has been written. However, you will not be able to write automation in this mode. Let's jump down to write automation. Write automation is the mode that's going to enable and destructively record over anything that you have set. So if you have it set up where you're doing automation on faders and panning and send faders and mutes, if you have that on and you do one single pass of write automation, it's going to erase everything that was there. If nothing is there and you're starting fresh, then it's going to put that little dot there, so it's going to mark that there's been some automation written for that specific parameter. So be very careful with write automation. Write automation typically will happen when you are beginning your mix. It's kind of like that first static pass of just going through and setting levels. You do write automation. After you write this automation in, your DAW will jump into one of your overdub automation modes that will either be touch or latch. So this is why I jumped down to write first, to kind of give some clarity of that. The reason why it would jump into one of these modes, because if it stayed in write automation and you go to play back, even if you're not adjusting any fader or panning or anything in a plugin, it will write over what you previously written. So it would jump into touch mode or latch. Touch will allow you to write automation the moment that you touch the parameter. So if you see in the fader go up and down as you written the automation previously, um, the moment that you grab that fader and do something different or even leave it still, the moment you grab that fader, that's when automation will be written for that particular pass. Okay. Once the automation is stopped or you stop writing automation from that, it will stay in that mode. It will stay in touch mode. But if you play it back and don't touch any of the parameters, it will not write over the automation. So hence the reason why it's called touch. It only engages the automation to be written, to write once you actually touch the parameter. Latch works a little differently than touch. Latch will allow the user to begin writing the automation the moment that they touch the parameter. However, once they let the parameter go, it will stay at that level. So let's say, for example, if you're adjusting the vocal fader and you leave it at -4 dB, and you let the parameter go, you let the fader go, but Pro Tools is still, the playhead is still going. It will stay there at -4 dB until you actually stop the playhead by hitting spacebar, right? Then Pro Tools will stop, and then whatever automation is after that point, it will play back that previous automation. So latch, once you latch on, it will write the automation, but it will continue to write that automation until you either stop Pro Tools or until you stop Pro Tools, and then that's when it will resume the automation that was previously there. And then the last one is trim. After you've done all of your kind of macro automation, so to speak, your more global things like the larger movements and effects, like if you have like chimes or you have a sweep and you wanted to go from the left speaker to the right, you can automate the pan to go from left to right or right to left. After you do all of those, let's say you have, like for volume, you want to do some kind of micro type of changes. Let's say that your vocal pass is a bit too loud and you want to just bring it down 2 dB or 1 dB. You can do trim automation and just make those small movements, right? So small minor adjustments. And we will look at this in Pro Tools. I'll go over this in depth so you can see how this automation will work in the mix, right? So do we have any questions so far? Okay, so let's continue on. So some of the other things that you can look up for mixing, if you go into Lynda, there's pretty good tutorials there that covers walking through an entire mix. Those are some of the general things that we went over tonight, but I want to go right into Pro Tools so we can pull up Project 6 so you can see how this functions, and I can get a mix going and we can talk through what I'm thinking about as I am building the mix so we can apply all of these things to our final project. And we also provide on the assets for Project 6, we have a helper movie for Project 6 that is pretty detailed too. So let's get started. I'm going to create a new session. I need this in wave 48 kilohertz, stereo mix, my bit depth 24-bit. Just going to save my session just as we've been doing all month, right? Okay. Now, for Project 6, you're mixing a song called Breakaway. Breakaway is a song that was produced by Fight Ren. He is an instructor at Full Sail. He teaches audio production or advanced production techniques. His class, if I'm not mistaken, is probably your third to last class in the program. So that's a senior level course. Um, but Mr. Wren has worked with several artists in the industry. You can look him up. Um, his name is spelled, he's German, so his name is spelled Veit Wren. So Professor Veit Wren, you will have him for your advanced production techniques course. And he's worked on records all around the world, sold over 60 million albums, working with NSYNC, Backstreet Boys, and a lot of movie soundtrack stuff and all types of things. So he produced this song called Breakaway, and we use it for this class because it's a good song to work on the concepts that we teach this month. Okay, so when you download the stems for the class or for the project, they will be as a zip file, so make sure you unzip them so you can see all the stems here in the folder. You should have 20 files here. It's important that you do that, so when you're in Pro Tools and you go to import your data, and I just did the quick command, the shift command I can go ahead and quickly access these files. Okay. So I can bring all of these instruments in, all of these stems in by clicking on the first one to select it, scroll down to the bottom, hold down shift, click on the last one, and you see it will select all 20 tracks. Now we're going to copy all into our session. Hit done. Here, hit open to save these in your audio files folder. Okay, so I am bringing these files in, and I want the destination to be new track. Okay, so now I have my 20 files in my session. I can also see these in my clip list. All right, so now that I have all my files in, I can see that this is a good example to see that when you're in Pro Tools and you import multiple tracks, that the tracks are organized in alphabetical order. Now, that's not really, doesn't serve a good purpose for me here because there's no organization or no logic to why these tracks are this way, like the ahs, arpeggiated, then background vocals, bass, clap, effects, hi-hat, kick, then lead vocal. So that doesn't make logical sense to me. So at this point, I want you guys to rearrange these tracks so they will be in a logical order. And the best way to do this is to probably go over to your mix window. And right now I'm looking at these faders in a narrow view. You can hold down Option Command M, and you can change the size of your tracks here. Now, to move faders around or to move tracks around in Pro Tools, first of all, I have all of these selected, so they all highlighted. So I'm going to hold down Option and just click off of that, or click on one so they deselect it. And I'm going to start moving these instruments around so they're more logical. I'm just clicking on a track name, and I'm going to drag these in a more logical order. So kick, snare, hi-hat. Probably will put the claps next to the snare. So that's probably going to be somewhat of like the down, I mean the upbeats. Then I have the bass. Move the bass. Now you can move your synth parts over, or you can do your effects wherever you know. And this is up to you, but this is kind of really common to have your drums, bass, keyboard parts, any effects, and then your vocals. So I'm just going to organize it that way. When you see that you have multiple tracks that are pretty much they're already arranged this way, like sitting next to one another, so they organize well. I can move all of these together in one whole block by holding down Shift on one. Click on one, hold down Shift, and select the last one. Then I can just drag all of these over next to the bass. Then I will probably move the arpeggiator. I select these two, effects 1 and 2. Then I select my lead vocal, my background vocals, and then I have my odd tracks here. So this is a more logical order. Remember to save your work frequently. As you're working in Pro Tools, you see that your icon is kind of grayed out there. That's because you didn't save your work, or you did a task and didn't save. So just hit Command S. Get used to I typically like to have my thumb and index finger in that kind of area as I'm working. So even when I toggle between the mix and edit window, it's just a habit to do, Command S to save frequently. Okay, so now that we have those organized, go ahead and create a couple of, go to the last track. Typically you would select the last track, and then we could start with a couple of time-based or auxiliary inputs, because you're required to have at least 2 time-based effects in your session. So I'm just gonna add reverb, and I'm gonna go Command right arrow. That will bring me to the next track name, and then I can call this delay. Okay, save my work again. Shift Command N, and I'm going to create a stereo master fader. Alright, and what I will probably do here is create another, like a mono auxiliary track, and then we'll just call this mono delay. Okay, so organizing the session, even before listening to the song, I'm starting to map out how this is going to be laid out, and I can begin to work more efficiently because everything is pretty much organized. There's a couple of other things that I want to do here that's required for the project. I'm going to adjust the tempo. So I'm going to click on my plus sign, and I'm going to change the tempo to 128 beats per minute. Command S to save the work. Let's verify my playback engine set to Mbox Mini. And because I have my tempo at 128 and I'm in grid mode here, if you go over here, if you haven't played around with the grid is pretty cool. It works and functions just like the grid would work in Logic. So it will allow you to make movements or selections based off of the increments that you have here. So you can put it on 1 bar. That way, as you are at the very beginning of your session, you're required to add markers for the different sections. So you add a marker by hitting the plus sign under the marker ruler. If you don't see the marker ruler, select go up here to your to this box here where you can select what you're actually viewing on your ruler. So if you don't see markers, just make sure that that's checked. I'm at the beginning of the session, so I can hit the plus sign and just change the name to intro. There are a lot of things that you can do with memory locations, but for right now, we're just going to use these as kind of placeholders for the different sections of our song. Okay? And if you guys have any questions as I'm going through this, just feel free to drop a note there online, and then I'll be able to go over it in more detail if you kind of missed something. This is also archived, so you'll be able to go back and check it out as well. So I have my intro at the very beginning. I could play this and just make sure I have audio. Okay, that's not good with the error. Probably have to restart my computer or restart the session at least. But I have audio coming in. I'm going to go ahead over 8 bars till I can get to bar 9, which is going to be for my verse. And I can see that my lead vocal starts there. So I'm going to click on bar 9, and I'm seeing that here in my main counter. If you don't see that in the main counter, just select bars and beats. There. And then now I can select plus again, and then this will be verse 1. You're required to have at least 3 markers in your session: the intro, verse, and the chorus. And the chorus will start with the background vocals here on bar 29. Now, another way you can add markers rather than clicking the plus sign is by putting your cursor or your selector right there where you need it at bar 29 or any place. Then hold down Control. As you hold down Control, a plus sign will appear. Just click on it, and then you can add your memory location. And remember to save your work. Okay. Color coding. Yes, you can color code the tracks. Color coding is really good because it's going to help you organize, be able to see where things are as you're working through your session. And it's very helpful, especially if you're going to spend quite a bit of time in your session. And your eyes are going to get pretty fatigued looking at the same color the whole time. So it could get pretty interesting when you color code. To color code, you will select the group of tracks that you want to be that specific color. In this case, I want my drums to be a different color, so I will select kick, hold down shift, and then click on hi-hat. And at the bottom, I will have these color bars, which will allow me, if I click on it, will pull up my color palette. And now I can change my channel strip or my channel itself or my track to a different color. Once I click on bass, and once you have this palette up here, color palette, you can leave it there and you don't have to keep clicking on the color codes down there. For all my synth parts, I'll be able to change those to a different color. This could be whatever you decide to choose. I have no specific rule. Feel free to color code this to how you so please. So it's quite that easy. Just selecting a track and you're just changing the color of each group of instruments. Background vocals. Here, possibly. And all tracks. All right. As you color code your session, let's see, I save my work here. You could also color code the clips. To color code the clips, one thing I'm going to do first, we're going to go over creating groups before we color code the clips. So let's just go ahead and close this box for a second. You have a group list here. If you don't see that, you can expand that left column to view your track list and your group list. With your groups, you are able to group like tracks into a single group to do multiple or more global changes over those instruments. So if I wanted a group for my drums, I can select all of my drum tracks, go to my group list, the group menu, and select new group or Command G and just label this drums. I don't know if there's a shortcut to pull up the color code palette. I typically just click on the bottom here. I'm sure there might be a shortcut to it. Oh, it's actually not. Okay, so typically if there's a shortcut to it, it would say it under next to the command. Okay, but with the palette, you can click up at the top or the bottom to pull those up. I don't think you can click anywhere in between, but top or the bottom, you'll be able to pull those up. Okay, so you see I have my drum group here. With my drum group, now that I have these in a single group here, as I am moving my faders, as you see now, all of them will go at the same place. It also works for muting, solo. If you don't see that it's functioning this way, you can go ahead and click the dot next to the drum, the group symbol, and you can be more specific about the commands that's going to be in that group, such as send mute, send levels, whether the group is just going to be dedicated for edit, mix, or edit and mix. If you added more tracks to like say drums, if you added like a tom or something, or a second kick or a snare, you can add those into the group by just clicking on the track and then add those into the current group. So since the bass is solo by itself, I don't need a bass group. However, I can create one for my synths. So select all of these, and I remember that the quick command is Command G. So I hit that, and I can just label that synth. Select these two, synth pad. Arpeggiator single. I can do the effects, the vocal single. I can do the background vocals. And as you see, as I'm working through this, I am organizing my session. I haven't listened to it yet. However, I'm not sure if it will play back with this error that I'm getting, but we're going to go through and see if we can work through this together. So I have my groups here, so whatever I am doing as I am working in my session, I can do more global things as it relates to the group, which will quickly allow me to, if I wanted to hear like the synth and the drums together, I can easily hear those by just clicking on those rather than having to click on each solo for the things I want to hear. If you want to turn the group off, you simply just click on the name and you will see that it's no longer colored in there, and you'll be able to make changes. When you are mixing, you're not going to be mixing with the group on, because you won't have any independence over each fader. Now, there's a such thing of actually kind of operating as a clutch. You can, as the group is inactive or active, you see it's active now where everything is together, it's moving. I can hold down Control and move a fader. As I'm holding down Control, it's kind of operating as a clutch where I can do an independent control rather than doing more of a group thing. Now, once I let go of Control and move it, now things are moving relative. Okay, so just hold down Control to make those changes. Same as if you have it in a group and you're soloing everything and you just want to hear the kick, just hold down Control and you can solo and hear any instrument you want that's within that group while the group is active. Okay, I'm going to hold down Remember. I'm going to turn the group off. Remember Option will click on the fader and move everything back to 0. Okay, so without going too far off track, let's save our work. Now that we have our groups created, I'm going to turn all my groups on, and let's go ahead and toggle over to the edit window. Now that I have things in a group, my drums, once I click on this, single click on it or triple click, now you see that it color coded or selected all of these clips. Now I can click my color palette and I can change this from tracks to clips in track. And as you see, they're showing the different colors. Now I can select one single color, so it will be the same color as the track itself. Alright, so as you see here with the different synths, although I have the track itself in this green color, I have the different clips in different colors. Now that I have these in a group, I can select clips in track, and I can change this all to one single color. Right. So now that's not, again, this is not mandatory, but as you're working on your mix and you're spending quite a bit of time in your session, it's always good to have some sort of organization that's going to help you visually as you're working. Save my work. Okay. Another cool thing about the color coding of your track, you can change the saturation. So if you want to dim it out some, you can just go full on color, change the brightness, or just turn it off. Okay, and this is typically what I do for all of my sessions. I'm going to change a few of these colors here because this is not exactly working for me. I'll just change this a little bit. And if you don't have this in a group, for example, if the group is off, I don't want you guys to think that you have to have a group to be able to color code multiple tracks. You don't. You can simply just select multiple tracks by just clicking and dragging over different tracks to select the ones that you want, and then just simply pull up your color palette, and then you can change those accordingly. Okay? So those are pretty much the basics of your organization of your session. There are other things that you can do. One of the last thing I want to show you before we move on to adjusting the mix. Let's go ahead and work on our auxiliary tracks here. You're required to have at least 2 time-based effects in your session. Please remember to create the auxiliary tracks and route your effects properly. That's 20 points on your final project. That entire section of time-based processing is 20 points. We want you to properly route the effect, apply it, and use a custom setting on the effect. So we don't want you to use a standard preset. If you miss that, that's 20 points on the assignment. So just make sure that you pay attention to the instructions there. Let's talk about let's go in a bit further with the routing of our effects and organization of it, because we didn't cover this in the last class, but this is a good time to do so. Okay, so I have reverb, delay, and mono delay. I'm just going to go ahead and apply those effects. Those plugins to the track. Okay, and then I need a mono delay. I just use aerodynamic mono. Okay, so I have my processors on my time-based track, and this is what I want you guys to do first, like as you organize it, so you can make sure that you get those points and you're not tempted to apply the reverb directly on a vocal track. Remember that you have to have an auxiliary input to do this correctly. Let's finish our routing here. Now we know that we use a bus, right, to route internally inside of a DAW to route our effects from our dry signal or our dry track to our wet track. And let's just go over that again. A dry track, basically, let's say for the vocals, meaning that this signal will come out dry. Out of the output of this track, it would have no time-based effects coming out of this track. However, when we route it via a bus and the send, we send a portion of that from this track to the effect that we want. Okay, so let's go through. Let's go to our setup drop-down menu and go to IO. And this is what's really cool for some of you guys who haven't explored the busing. Now we've worked this month in inputs and outputs, right? But let's look at bus. When you go over to your third tab here, this is where you can really customize your buses. Let's say you know that bus 1 and 2 is going to be reverb. You can rename this reverb. If you expand this, you will see how it shows the entire path, bus, the left and right side. Like 3 and 4 is a stereo bus. You see 3 is mono and 4 is mono. So these are 2 mono buses that equals a stereo bus path. Let's say bus 3 and 4 is going to be delay. Let's label that delay. Bus 5, now keep in mind that this is mono, so we're not going to label bus 5 and 6 mono delay because that will be a stereo assignment, but we're going to label bus 5 mono delay. Okay. Let's say bus 7 and 8 is going to be chorus effect. All right, so any questions so far? We go to the bus and we rename these buses. Now, what's going to happen once we click OK, this is going to help us out a lot because now when we go to our input to make the assignment and we go to bus, now we see not only, we don't see bus 1 and 2, now we see reverb. So this can help you out a lot, especially working in a large session where you're going to have multiple time-based effects. You're going to be able to see this more quickly and know that, okay, you don't have to remember bus 3 and 4's delay, bus 5 is this. Now, I don't typically rename my buses. I have a good knack at memorizing what I have set up. So when I go to my lead vocal, excuse me, I can go to set it up on reverb. It was easier to see. Delay will be the same. Select delay. Bus 5. You see bus 5 now is mono delay, not 6, right? Because it's just one channel. So on this I can add a delay, and I could add mono delay if I wanted to, but I'm not going to put that there. We'll put it somewhere else. Okay, now these settings will be saved for when you send these in. I will actually see the IO settings, so it's going to save with your session. Because it's what I want you to know is that although we renamed this, it's still routing it's still bus 1 and 2. It's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on. It's just that we changed the name of it. So easier way to look at this. And we can do this throughout our session. Let's say that we had bus 9 and 10 going to drum subgroup, and we'll go over that in a second. Okay, and we'll leave it there. Save your session. So you guys see the importance of organizing your session before you even get it started. It's going to help you to understand what's going on, color coding your session. And I want to encourage you guys to do this as you're working on your projects. Keep developing this. When you get an opportunity, this is like the golden, like when you get a golden opportunity, you're in LA and you get or wherever you are, and you get an opportunity to assist on a session, or you're an intern and you get an opportunity to set up a session for a client that's coming in. If you go in that room and you set up your session with proper groups, proper labeling, logical order of your tracks, markers, tempo, the studio and the producer will love you. You will probably get hired because this is something that a lot of people fail to do. Pay attention to the details, making sure that your clips are labeled with your tracks. Everything is organized, is in a logical order. Because what happens and what you're saying by doing this, you're showing that you are a person of detail, and you take pride in what you're doing, and you care about the session, and you're going to be able to keep up with that session because it's going to be very logical, not only for the engineer but the producer. Someone else was to look at the session, and just like I told you guys earlier in the month when I opened up one of my sessions for my album, and we saw all the markers, we saw all the color coding, the groups. It's the same thing that I do professionally. So this is what I would like for you guys to work on. Keep developing these habits. All right, so let's talk a little bit more specifically about Project 6. We have everything organized. Some of what I've done, very little of what I've done is what's required. I like when students go over and above, and I give acknowledgement for doing so. When you're turning your projects and it looks, where you took some time and spent time with it. For Project 6, you are required to use dynamic and time-based processing. We talked about the time-based processing where you have to use a minimum of 2. For the dynamic side of the project, you are required to have a compressor on the kick, the snare, and what I'm going to do is I'm just using the comment box down here, just to kind of copy, select, and then copy and paste, so I know where I need to apply dynamic based processing. So you are required to apply a compressor on the kick, the snare, the bass, and the lead vocal. You are required to use at least 3 EQs in your session. You can apply that to either one of these, whatever you see fit. Some students over process the session. I don't recommend that you over process your session, meaning that you don't have to have a plugin on every track. As you're listening to the song, again, listen to the arrangement, listen to what's required. We talked about contrast in your mix, big and small instruments, sounds. We talked about creating depth. Use these concepts as far as balancing to decide what tracks will need proper treatment. So I'm just, as a general, what you can do is just apply compression and EQ to these 4 general tracks here. This is not to say that this is the only tracks that need processing. You would certainly need to have this on other tracks. Lastly, for the time-based auxiliary tracks, what I want you to do is put your tracks in solo safe. Solo safe will allow you to listen to the dry signal and the wet signal at the same time rather than having to hit solo on both. Okay? So by putting your tracks in solo safe, you hold down Command and just click on your time-based effects. That's going to gray these out. Save your work again. Let's see. And there's not going to be any processing or processor on the master fader. Leave that without processing. Select all for your groups and just make sure, I'm going to hold down. Okay, so all my faders are at unity. Hold down all on your group and you can bring all your faders down. Select all again. Go to your time base, hold down Option, and bring those back to 0 as well as your master fader. And then you will begin to build your mix 1 track at a time. Okay, so as you're building your mix, Be very conscious of your gain structure. Um, we want you to give yourself at least 6 dB of headroom for your master fader. If you're mixing too hot where all your faders are way up here and you're starting to, you have room and headroom on your individual tracks, but you don't have enough headroom on your master fader. So be very conscious as you're pulling up your tracks and you're starting to blend these together. And this is generally how you would start doing your mix. You're bringing up your elements. You would decide which ones need compression and EQ. Apply those respectively. Make those adjustments. Another cool thing about option, once you have a good setting on something that's logical for that track, you can hold down option and you can drag the plugin over, and now you see that I have that plugin also on another track. Now the setting on my snare track may not be appropriate as I had it set for the kick, but it's a good place to start making your adjustments. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit further, and I'm going to probably have to restart Pro Tools and see if I could get rid of that error. But do we have any questions so far? Are there any questions in the class? Okay, so as you're building your mix, you're going to apply the necessary processing, EQ, compression. Again, depends on the sound that you are working with. I'm just doing some general settings here, not even listening to it, just kind of put some adjustments here. So at least 3 EQs and compression on these tracks that's indicated here. And all of this will be in the instructions. Let's talk about panning. I'm just going to move these faders up at some levels that I think would sound appropriate. Now that I'm on my vocals, on the vocal tracks, for the panning, this is a good way of making sure that you're using a wide image. You are required to make adjustments on all of your faders. None of your faders should be at unity. And your pans, again, you will not pan the kick, the snare, the bass, or the vocal. No panning. Okay. So just put notes in here for the archive. However, with the other sounds, you can pan those accordingly. Synth 1 is your main synth in your session. This is the synth that is going the entire length of the session. Because of that, I would not pan, if you pan that, I will pan it very slight to the left or right, meaning no more than 5 to the left or 5 to the right. What you can do, if you, for example, if you're panning your synth 1, maybe 5 to the right, maybe pan the hi-hat, maybe 3 to 5 to the left. Not too far, but just slightly off of center. And then you will have to listen to these sounds to see where you would like these pan. With your tracks that's like synth pad 1 and 2, maybe you would try the 9 and 3 o'clock approach, meaning like if you're looking at a clock, this will be 9 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Maybe try that approach. Arpeggiator, maybe you will want to do automation on that. So we'll look at that in a second. Pan out your effects a little bit. But looking at the vocal tracks. because I have typically with vocals, I usually have more stacks than this, meaning that I have a larger section of vocals or more tracks of vocals that will give me more places to pan the vocals so it sounds wider. But because we had to scale this mix down to fit the specs for FSO and delivery, this is why you only have a few background vocal tracks. But what you can do with the vocals, I would probably pan vocal 1 and 2, hard panning left and right. So I'm all the way at 100%. Maybe for the Oz, I would pan it maybe 7, about, I guess that's about, I guess about 4 o'clock, about 8 and 4 o'clock. And then maybe this one could be slightly off center. Okay. So as you see, I'm starting to use a lot of the real estate of my stereo image. Now it's going to be several of these tracks that's not panned because we don't need those panned. With the claps, maybe if the hi-hat is slightly to the right, we can probably move this maybe about 7 to slightly to the left here, then we'll move this 7 to the right. So this is just a guide. This is not a hard rule. Remember to save your work. Okay, so if there's a reverb on a vocal and say the snare, you would need 2 auxiliary tracks for a reverb, correct? Great question. Because I have a reverb set here, let's say that my reverb was set to a plate, and let's say that this reverb worked well for the vocals at about maybe 2 seconds. A little bit of pre-delay. And we'll keep the diffusion pretty high so it doesn't sound empty. Let's say I wanted to apply that reverb on the snare, and I need a reverb on the snare. I could either decide to make a new auxiliary track and create another reverb, or I can try out the reverb that I currently have in the session and route it to the snare to see what it sounds like. And this is common. You don't always have to have a separate reverb for different instruments because it's still covering the same amount of space. The good thing about using our sends is we're able to control the percentage of how much we're sending to our auxiliary tracks. So this is something pretty cool. Let's say that I have reverb on, but in this case, let's change this. I'm going to take this off of the snare. And let's say that the reverb here, I find out that this works well for the vocals. So I'll just put vocals here in the comments. And again, and these are just notes for yourself as an engineer. Let's say the reverb works well for the lead vocal, and then I want to also apply this to the background vocal. And this is another way you can use your option key and just click and drag this over. And this might work well for the odd tracks as well. So you will want your lead vocal to be drier than your background vocals. Probably because you want that to be more present in your mix, right? The more reverb you add to something, the more it pushes it back further in your mix. So I've decided that this reverb here works well with my vocals. Say my work, so I can get in here and go back to my IO setting, and I can modify this and just call it vocal reverb. Now if I decide that I want a snare reverb, I can create maybe a mono auxiliary track and call it snare reverb. Okay. Mono, and maybe on the snare I will use a short haul or small haul. about 1 second or so. And because this is mono, I can go and put this on a single bus, say bus 11, and that would be my snare reverb. And let's just come down here to the next send here. I got A, B, and C, right? This works as A, B, C, D, and E. And if you need more, you can view that here under your mix window view and choose send F through J. I'm going to show you guys a little trick here in a second. So since we're already in the habit of labeling our sends, our buses, we can go back to our setup and label bus 11, not bus 11 and 12, but bus 11 because it's mono. Label this snare reverb. Remember, you have to pull up the send fader for that to work. Okay, so let's look at another view in your sends. If you hold down Command and you click on the arrow of your send, it will change it to a fader, a send fader. So you hold down Command and you click on the send. Now you have a fader here rather than having to click on this and then have a pop-up send fader. You can see all of these together in one row. And this is why I put this separate, because my slot A here I'm using for my vocal reverb, and that's just a kind of a habit, something that I do. If I'm viewing like send B, I know that all the tracks that I'm using with delay will be on B. Whatever I'm sending to the snare reverb, let's say I want the claps to go also to the snare reverb, then maybe pull the level down a little bit. I can have that going there on a separate send assignment. Okay, does everyone see that? And you could get out of that and close it easily by each one by holding down Command and clicking on the arrow there on the send. Okay, give me some problems there. I'm going to restart Pro Tools. See if I can get rid of that error. All right, so you guys following pretty well? Is there a rule of thumb for creating an aux track in mono or stereo? Great question. The rule is if you, well, I wouldn't say it's a rule because, all of this is the creative process, and any of this could be modified, adjusted based off of your, ideas of how you want this to sound. But generally, if you have, let's think of it like this. Think of it like a guitar, right? A guitar is a mono instrument, right? Now, we can have a stereo effect on that instrument, but if the effect is not doing anything stereo, meaning that on each side there's not a different effect, then it's no more than just two of the same size that's happening. So what is that doing in our mix? It actually makes our mix more cluttered because we have a lot of stereo effects that are masking and sitting on top of each other. Good example of that is, let's look at our panning for our stereo effects. Anytime you create a stereo auxiliary track, what happens? The pans are default to 100% left and right. If we're not doing anything where we are adjusting the actual panning on the send, I don't want to go too far, but if we're not actually panning the send, like, okay, here's the vocal send. If we're not panning this, we wouldn't pan this to the right or left because we want our vocal to be center. Um, but let's say this was a guitar track, and if we're not panning this left or right, basically that is going to be sending to our auxiliary input, which is going to feed both the left and right side evenly. So that's going to take up that amount of space in our stereo image. If I'm looking at a mono instrument like such as a guitar, or this synth right here, and I wanted a mono delay on this instrument, and this instrument is panned maybe 8 to the right, and let's say my mono delay, okay, I already have that renamed, so I can just go to bus and select mono delay. Because my track for my synth is panned to the right here, this is the dry signal that's being panned. I could match that with the delay and make the delay sit at the same position, 8 to the right. Or I could do something really interesting by moving it 8 to the left, or move it completely in the opposite direction to create image. So if you could imagine what that would sound like, you have the synth pan here, but the effect of it is pan this way. So you're hearing it like kind of right here. If you know, considering you're listening to headphones, you're hearing it about right here because it's right off of the center. You're not hearing it evenly in both ears. You're hearing it right here, but you're hearing the effect more in your left ear. So what that's doing is causing and creating a lot of depth in your image. So it sounds pretty cool. If you wanted to have it sitting at the same place, then you will hear that effect on top of the instrument. So to answer your question, like a rule of thumb when using a mono or stereo auxiliary or effects, it's really up to taste and how you're placing things in your mix. If you're getting into doing a lot of auxiliary or time-based effects and things are stereo all across the board, then you're not going to hear a good separation. So what I would like to see you guys do, if you're going to add a mono effect to a sound, play around with the panning. You know, don't leave the send or the auxiliary track centered. You know, pan it either where the panning of the instrument is, or maybe pan it in a contrary motion. Okay. Um, so think about it. Let me see if I could pull this up really quick. It's you guys are probably going to flip out when you see this video because it's so old. But when I was learning and sharpening my ears as a mix engineer, see if I can find it. This is probably the funniest video because it's so vintage, and but the guy in the video has the classic mullet, I believe. But it's a book that let's see if I could pull this up for you guys. The book is called The Art of Mixing. Just type it in here for you guys. See if I could pull this video up. But this is a book that I don't have it anymore, but so probably somewhere in my garage or something like that. But I'm trying to pull this up for you guys. Pull this over here. Okay. All right. So you guys can see this. I want you to check this out. Let's just look at this picture for a second. If I can. Okay. All right. This is a good. It's quite comical because of the video is so old. But let's see, I'll try to paste the link here so you guys could pull this up in your browsers and save it. But let's look at this diagram here. This is kind of what I want you guys to be thinking about when you're mixing a song. This is probably not a good representation here. I'm trying to find something a little more basic. probably gonna be kind of tricky to find what I need here, but with so much going on in these videos. But basically, how he is doing with these videos, when you see it left or right, you're dealing with panning. Okay, here's your left speaker, your right speaker. Um, you see how the lead guitar is really out front. That means that it's the closest, that's the loudest at the, as far as your mix level. The sax is panned slightly to the left. The vocal, as you see, is centered. You can see all your cymbals and all your tones up here is represented is high. So that's representing like frequencies, right? The higher frequencies. You see the bass down at the bottom. That's your bass frequencies. You can see the guitar pan to the left or right. So check this video out if you would like. There's a few more in here. This is probably not the main one. I see this is in Spanish here, but check this video out and let me know what you think. But this is kind of what I want you to get from this is like placement in your mix. When you think about mixing, like where you're going to sit these instruments in the mix. If you're going to, if you want it to be more, towards the listener, closer to the listener. If you want it to be further away, and that's what you're seeing here. As they are further away, that means this is the volume, the placement. When considering the effects and where you are panning these, this is kind of what I want you to get you guys to envision. So that book, The Art of Mixing, you could probably still find it at a bookstore or find it online. I'm sure they still sell it, but it's a really good book. When I first started mixing, that was the first book that I purchased, and it's a great resource because it gets you to start visualizing where these instruments are sitting in the mix. And this is what's required of you for your final project. Lastly, after you have all of the things mapped out, and you will also see this in the rubric for what's required, you are to bounce down your mix. So your final mix, you are to bounce it down. And so the process of bouncing down your mix is so you can render out to an MP3. So to do so, you go to File, Bounce to, Disk. Make sure that your bounce source is on out 1 and 2 or front left, front right, or whatever is routing from your master fader, right? Because this is going to be your final source. Change the file type MP3. Format should be interleave. Sample rate 48. And if you're using Pro Tools 11, it should create a bounce folder for you. So you select bounce. Change your bit rate to 192 kilobits per second. And then click OK. Okay. So that will bounce down. It will. So I'm not going to wait the entire time, but you will have a bounce file in your folder. Let me pull up my Project 6 here so you can see what's required for you guys to send. Okay, so once you have your all of your requirements for your session, you should have your session file, your bounce file. If you're using Pro Tools 11, it will create a bounce folder for you, so that's fine if that's the case. Otherwise, if you're using an older version of Pro Tools, make sure that your bounce is in the root directory of your session folder. So make sure your bounce is not in your audio files folder. You should have all your stems here, and because you were saving your work the entire time, you should have the latest version of your Pro Tools session here. Then you will compress that and if done properly, this file should be no more than um, 80 to 85 megabytes. Okay, well, a little higher, but it should be under 100 at least. Um, this could be because I have some, let's see, I should have 20 files in there. Okay, well, as long as you're under 100 megabytes, you'll be fine and be able to submit that via FSL. All right, if you have any problem, if you have any problems with uploading, um, just remember to use Dropbox to do that. Okay, so as far as the kilobits per second, that is going to be the quality of your MP3s. So if you want a smaller file of your, like a higher compressed MP3, then you can do one that's like 128. Typically 192 is going to be pretty cool. You could do 128, 160. It's quite a few in that list there. Let's open up this session again. You don't want your MP3 to be too large because you want it, it's designed for quick delivery, right? So you want to have this sent via email or messages. As you can see here, this file is 192 kilobits and it's 2.1 megabytes. Had I bounced this down at 320, it will be a lot larger. Here's another version of Project 6. As you can see, this one has more processing in there. You don't have to go this far, but it gives you an idea of how far you can take the mix with different effects. Okay, and what we'll do in a review session this week, what I want you guys to do before I get into automation is showing you those tricks. I wanna let you guys get started with the mix, and then on Thursday we will open up some other mixes, probably from my project, probably from Ian Vaughn's project, this R&B artist that I work with. We'll probably open up some other mixes and look at the difference between the mix or the rough mix in Pro Tools and how it was mixed in Logic, as well as getting into the automation. Okay, as you're mixing this week, I don't want you guys to get so involved in like necessarily like the plugins and just over processing, but work to build a good balance. That is the essence of a good mix, a good balance, good space, good separation in your sounds, as far as balancing frequencies. So work on that for the first part of the week. If you have any questions, just get in contact with us, and then we could assist you along the way if you need some more specific directions, some input concerning the mix. All right. So do you guys have any questions before we end the class for the evening? Okay, here's another link here. It's just the okay, thank you, Carmen, for sharing that link. It might be more modern. It looks that way. All right, so I'm gonna check that out again. So I hope that you guys are able to make the review session on this Thursday coming. I'm really excited to get to week 4 with you all, and I hope that the information that I was able to teach you this month is something that will stick with you guys throughout your training here and your career. So be sure to get in contact with me even after, although we have one more review class. I won't see you guys after that because I don't teach any other classes here. So, but if you ever need any other assistance along the way, I'm always here. You have my information. Feel free to get in contact with me, and I wish the very, very, very best to each and every one of you guys. All right. So I'm going to archive this up, and you guys will be able to see this on tomorrow. And hopefully I will see you guys this Thursday. All right. Have fun with the mix. Enjoy your evening, and we'll talk to you very soon. Take care.